Our Old Testament reading today was from Exodus 20, looking at the giving of the Ten Commandments. And for many of you, that might take you back to that great Hollywood classic from way back in the 1950s, I think, with Charlton Heston playing Moses and a rather Hollywoodized and over-dramatized version of the giving of the Ten Commandments. Well, whatever it was like, it's certainly like that, I'm sure we can know. But when we think about the Ten Commandments, how do we think about them? This week we were doing the Bible course, and we got to that point in the Bible, looking at these 10 rules that God gave to the people of Israel, and that are still the rules that shape many cultures and societies around the world today. Number one, no other gods. God is a jealous God and wants our worship. We aren't to worship others. 2, no idols. Anything physical or non-physical that we worship in the place of God, that we put first, is an idol, and God hates idols. Thirdly, don't use God's name in vain. Fourthly, remember the Sabbath day. We need a rest and a rhythm in our lives as God has put into creation. Then honor your parents. Do not murder. Do not commit, do not steal, do not bear false witness, and do not covet. Some of you may have learnt these 10 commandments way back as part of confirmation preparation, or in Sunday school, or even at school. They've been kind of drummed into us. They're part of the DNA of our culture. But of course, these laws, although they're the heart of the law, are only a few of the many hundreds of laws that we find in the Old Testament. And in our Bible course, it was very helpful to look at the different kinds of law and which ones apply today and how. So we looked at the civic or civil laws that we find in the Old Testament, given to Israel as a nation, how to organize themselves politically and socially. And those laws are not for us today. They were for that people thousands of years ago in that particular context in the Middle East. But there are lessons in those laws that we can apply and transfer and translate to today's culture. Then there are the ceremonial laws, all to do with the sacrificial system, to do with food laws, to do with ritual separation. And they're a reminder that in the Testament, it was what we did on the outside with our actions, physically, that was a demonstration of how our relationship with God was worked out. And those laws have been fulfilled and replaced in the New Testament by a recognition that our relationship with God is about what is on the inside. So rather than washing our hands physically, it's the spiritual washing of the Holy Spirit on the inside that makes us clean before God. So those ceremonial laws do not apply. They're illustrations for us today rather than anything that applies. And then there's the moral laws, such as the 10 Commandments. But even those are different now from how they were back then. Then they were the legal code on which society was built. But Jesus reminds us that what we do on the outside should reflect what's on the inside. So a law like do not murder, further by Jesus into not looking at a person with hate and not thinking angry and hateful or murderous thoughts about anyone in our hearts. The law on do not commit adultery is taken into our internal attitudes towards people, about misusing sex, about thinking lustfully, not just about what we actually do. And that's an important question about why we need laws. And there are several very straightforward, good reasons why we do. And I'm simply going to list these because some of these are simply common sense. They tend to apply across every country and every culture and every religion pretty much as well. We need laws to promote the common good, recognizing that we aren't just individuals, we're part of a society. We need laws to protect the vulnerable, to prevent injustice and exploitation, by powerful individuals, by groups within society that oppress other groups, by powerful businesses and companies. We want laws to defend values that society has decided are important and core values in our world today. And we need laws to prevent anarchy, to regulate the behavior of people and of businesses, to prevent it just being a jungle out there and actually having some regulation. And we need laws to resolve disputes when things go wrong, to seek justice and to be consistent in how we apply that justice. So there are really good reasons for laws. Laws, in a sense, are what any loving parent gives their children. We set boundaries and we do it out of love. We tell our children, you can play in the garden, but don't go onto the road because it's dangerous. We say that because we love them. We say to children, do make friends, but be careful, don't talk just. We say that because we love them. And God's laws are given because he loves us. He knows what's best for us. He wants to protect us, particularly the most weak and vulnerable amongst us. And the fact is that if we throw out the 10 Commandments, and today there's a huge tendency to just reject all traditional forms of authority, but we so need laws that if we throw out those 10 Commandments, we soon replace them with other ones. And you can go online and find a ridiculous and entirely contradictory and often fairly absurd selection of rules for life, of ways that some wise person who just wants to make a lot of money from selling books has invented in order to give laws for modern life. We need rules. We need structure. We need boundaries. But if we think about this thing about what's on the inside, that's where it gets more complicated. And here a little bit of ethical theory, and don't worry about the long words. This is about what philosophers and theologians have discussed over the centuries, and three main ways in which people can, if you like, learn to be good. It's what we call deontological ethics. And those are the absolute rights and wrongs, things that always apply, like the 10 Commandments. In every country, in every culture, it's wrong to murder. It's wrong to abuse your parents. It's wrong to covet what's not yours and try and take it for yourself. Those are important, basic deontological ethics. They always apply. The second kind of ethics are what are called consequentialist ethics. And as the name suggests, they're about the consequences, the results of your action. And this is where what's right or wrong might be slightly different in different situations, depending on the consequences. So we might say it's wrong to kill, but in a situation of war, is killing always murder? If you are doing something to prevent the death of many other people, if you happen to have a gun because you're in the police and you see a terrorist about to explode a bomb that kills hundreds, you have to make a decision. And consequentialist ethics might say that the greatest good for the greatest number means killing that one person to prevent the deaths of many others. When Jesus says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you, it's a form of consequentialist ethics. We want to be treated how we would like others to treat us. But the thing I want to focus on is the third kind of ethics, because these are the ones that I believe Jesus points us to more and more. And these are what philosophers call virtue ethics. Growing certain values on the inside of us that transform our behavior. And means that, in a sense, we hardly need the rules and regulations. We need them as society. But as individuals, because of these virtues, we will know how to behave. It comes not just from a fear of breaking the law and getting caught out, not just from a difficult calculation about the best thing to do, but from knowing in our hearts what's the right to do. And in the New Testament, the fruit of the Spirit in Galatians 5, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, are a wonderful summary of those virtues. Those virtues we need to grow. Those are so much more important than simply keeping the rules. Because the fact is that Christianity is not primarily about keeping all the laws, about keeping the rules. There's this kind of myth that is very difficult to eradicate, that the Christian faith is about doing the right thing to make God happy, and that's what will get you into heaven. And there's an idea of God sitting there with a ledger writing down all our deeds, or with a pair of scales, putting our good deeds on one side and our bad deeds on the other. But that is not the Christian view of God. It's actually much more like the Old Testament or the Islamic view. The Christian view is quite different. We don't get to God by being good people. We don't get to God by keeping the laws. We're not saved. We don't earn a place in heaven by our works. And in fact, in our gospel reading today, we see an example of Jesus appearing to be quite a lawbreaker, to challenge the conventions of the time, as he goes into the temple with a cord of whips and he overturns the tables. He causes chaos to the monetary and legal system of the time as he throws out the moneylenders and others from the temple. But why is he doing it? Because he recognizes, although what the money changers were doing in the temple was strictly legal, it was keeping the law, because they were enable people to make the sacrifices. They were selling them the animals and birds to make those sacrifices. It was within the law, but it was deeply immoral, because they had turned God's house into a marketplace where they were exploiting the poor and greedily making as much money as they can out of other people. And that's where what comes from the inside is the important thing. And I heard a good example of that just on the news recently. The boss of the global furniture company, IKEA, talking about when they as a company were given the option last year of receiving governments around the world to pay their staff on furlough. And yet they recognized that actually they were able to afford to pay their staff, because although most of their stores had to close, they were still selling things online. And so legally, they could have received money from governments to pay their staff on furlough, but morally, they felt that wasn't the right thing to do, because they could still afford to pay their own staff as a business. So the right thing to do is not always the legal thing to do, strictly speaking. It's about the heart and the spirit of the law as much as it is about the letter of the law. And our gospel reading finished today with these extraordinary words. Many people saw the signs Jesus was performing and believed in his name, but Jesus would not entrust himself to them, for he knew all people. He did not need any testimony about mankind, for he knew what was in each person. It's the heart that was concerned about. And he could and he can see our hearts. He knows what's really there, what our intentions are, not just what our actions are. And the Bible's very, very clear that we are saved not by keeping rules, but by grace through faith. Grace is God's free gift. It's not from ourselves. It's not by our works, our keeping the rules, that we are saved. It's God's gift that we receive freely by our simple mustard seed size faith. And then it goes on to say, for we're God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. And I love this balance here, because it doesn't say, well, because it's by grace, therefore we needn't worry about the law. We're exempt. We can behave however we like. No, because we are saved by God's grace, we respond to God's grace by seeking to become and behave more like Jesus, to do those good works that God has prepared for us to do. And that brings us to my final summary. How do we become good? Not the right thing. How do we grow those virtues of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? Well, I don't know if you've ever had anybody who's inspired you. Maybe it was a parent or a grandparent, maybe a teacher, maybe someone in your community. and you wanted to be like them because there was something in their life that you admired so much and you wanted it to rub off. You spent time building that relationship. And that's what it's like with Jesus. Spend time with Jesus. If you want to grow these virtues, spend time with Jesus. And as you spend time with Jesus, try and think to do what Jesus would do. WWJD, what would Jesus do? If I'm in a tricky situation and there are a couple of choices, what would Jesus do? If I'm tempted to do something because I don't think anybody's looking, what would Jesus do? Where I could just take the easy option or the greedy option or the selfish option, what would Jesus do? And the other thing about growing these virtues is that virtues are a bit like muscles. If you don't bother to use them, they just atrophy and waste away. You grow the virtues by actually putting them into practice. How do you become more loving? By starting to love people in practical ways. How do you become more patient? By actually trying to be patient in every given situation. The more you do it, the easier it becomes as the virtues grow. So it's my prayer that all of us learn to become better people, not because that'll earn God's favor and get us into heaven, not to become legalistic, because Christianity is not all about keeping the rules, but we learn the freedom to become the people we've always wanted to be,